We already talked about harmful propaganda and how to recognize it, but it's also interesting to know how we can think critically about it and how we can respond when we see something we think is harmful. We asked our experts about how you can learn to think critically about propaganda. Let's have a look.
And so I do feel like to understand propaganda in contemporary societies, it is good to have an understanding of how propaganda worked throughout history. And I would urge young people to explore the history of propaganda in your own country as a way to connect the past to the present, and then also help us think more clearly about the future. Creating propaganda is different than creating an argument. Creating an argument requires developing a claim and using reasoning and evidence to develop it. Fine. But if you want to change hearts and minds, if you want to change behavior, communication experts have known from time immemorial, you must strike at the heart, right? Because people make decisions based on their head and their heart. So we encourage students to practice making propaganda for issues that matter to them by learning how to activate strong emotions, simplify information, appeal to audience needs and values, and sometimes to attack opponents. If you think about it, our world's greatest propagandist of the age is a teenager, Greta Thunberg, right? Greta Thunberg's skills as a propagandist are extraordinary. And she did it through using all four of those techniques. You could analyze Greta Thunberg's work up, down, and sideways and see how skillfully she was able to use her rhetorical skills to advance her position on the urgency of climate change. So creating propaganda is a great way to learn to think critically about it and to learn how to be a responsible communicator, using propaganda in responsible ways to be part of the democratic process and not just be a spectator, but be a citizen in a digital age.
So it's interesting to look at the history of propaganda and to create your own propaganda, to understand the mechanisms. But when we encounter harmful propaganda, what's the best way to respond?
And so we actually say that the best way to address harmful propaganda is to simply ignore it. Don't amplify it, right? Ignore it.
So does that mean we should never respond to harmful propaganda?
I think my point was not to say you shouldn't comment or critique propaganda. My point was simply to be aware of how you might inadvertently amplify propaganda by you giving it more attention. And the most truly harmful forms of propaganda, like, for example, ISIS beheadings, terrorist live stream video showing people being murdered on Facebook, right? Our human attention can be easily hijacked, right? And we can when stuff is coming at us fast and now on our social media screens, we can easily be lured into sharing and spreading that stuff in the moment it's circulating. And so to be aware that when you do that, you amplify propaganda. So I don't mean to suggest that you shouldn't critically analyze or comment on it. You should, but you just have to be really aware of how your behaviors may amplify propaganda and make a determination when it's important to amplify. So I do think it's important for people to evaluate propaganda. And I think platforms and dialogues and learning experiences can really help make it a normative for people to have reasoned dialogue about controversial propaganda.
So we can definitely respond, but we have to think about it first. If we decide that it's a good idea to respond, how can we do that?
Yeah, well, I think blame is not the way to move forward, but questioning is a good way to move forward. Because if you put something that I think is harmful on your social media feed, and I respond by going, oh my God, why are you sending that terrible message? You get defensive and we don't really have a dialogue, right? And you might feel self-righteous and the other person might feel aggrieved, but we haven't really come to any understanding. But if when you put harmful propaganda on your social media platform and I see it, if I write back and go, whoa, how do you interpret that message? Why did you feel the need to share it? Then that person may respond less defensively and may say, well, I really like it because blah, 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 blah. And now I can react by going, well, when I see it, I think blah, 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 blah. Because remember, propaganda is in the eye of the beholder. We don't see messages as propaganda when they align with our deepest values, right? When they meet our understanding, they match or align with our understanding of the world. So you didn't even think you were sharing propaganda. You just thought it was news, or you thought it was funny, or you thought it was blah, blah, blah. So I need to get into a dialogue where I can respectfully engage with you and say, you know, I didn't think it was funny, and I didn't think it doesn't reflect my values, and here's why it doesn't. Here's why it's painful for me to see that. And that then gives you the opportunity to be gracious and say, I respect your interpretation, but I even if I disagree with it.
If we want to react to harmful propaganda, is it something we should do privately or in public?
Certainly, how you choose to interact with someone will be based on the nature of your relationship with them. But I think the idea of, if you really believe that propaganda is in the eye of the beholder and that people can have different interpretations of a message, right? Then you proceed with a kind of an assumption of respect. You assume respect, and you can do that publicly or privately, depending on the nature of your relationship.
We know how to respond individually, but should countries also take measures against harmful propaganda? And is there something the EU should do?
Well, this is this question is a matter for the people of a particular country or a particular region to determine for themselves. So I would not be comfortable making a blanket set of advice that would work for every culture and every place. I have my study of propaganda has made me have a great deal of intellectual humility as I become more aware of the limits of my knowledge and understanding, and more appreciative of the multi-perspectival world that we live in.
Every country should find out where their needs are. What do you think is needed in your own country?